Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that is probably going to fundamentally shift how you view demographic realities right here in the United States. We're unpacking the urban Indian experience. We're going to look closely at direct data and research that absolutely shatters some long-held, deeply ingrained public misconceptions. So if you're ready to discover some hidden realities right in our own backyards, let's get started. I want to start by posing this question directly to you. When you picture Native American communities today, where do you imagine they live? If you're like most people, your mind instantly jumps to reservations, tribal territories, or rural homelands, right? It's a foundational assumption that's basically built into our education system and popular culture. But is it actually true?
Okay, let's dive into this. Traditionally, our public perception is heavily guided by historical federal structures. Just look at the seal of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. For over a century, federal policy, mapped territories, and agencies, just like the BIA, have anchored the narrative of Native Americans strictly to reservation lands. If you look at federal maps, you see these vast stretches of trust lands. So, it makes total sense that we'd assume that's where the population actually resides today.
But hold on, because the actual data tells a drastically different story. 78%. That is the percentage of all American Indians and Alaskan Natives who live completely off-reservation today. Let that sink in for a second. The vast, overwhelming majority of this population does not live on tribal lands. They're living in metropolitan areas, in cities, in suburbs, right alongside the rest of the urban population.
And this data brilliantly illustrates that reality, completely flipping the traditional narrative upside down. Only 22% remain on reservation. Now, this shift is partly historical. Many urban Indian populations were actually brought to cities by the federal relocation program back in the 1950s. Today, this massive 78% represents a highly migratory group. They're often moving between cities and reservations, but they are establishing their primary lives in urban centers across the country. Let's look at Section 1, the demographic reality, mapping the migration. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are about 6.79 million Native Americans in the United States today. That's just over 2% of the entire U.S. population. And where exactly are these 6.79 million people living? Well, the top 3 states might surprise you. California leads the nation by a wide margin, home to over 757,000 Native Americans. Oklahoma is second, with over 523,000, and Arizona comes in third with over 391,000. Notice that these aren't just states with large remote reservations. California in particular is defined by its massive urban metropolitan areas. In fact, to really hammer home this urban reality, check out this incredible micro-statistic. A single metropolitan county, Los Angeles County out in California, is home to 233,000 Native Americans. That's the highest number of any county in the entire country. But here's the catch. Unlike other minority populations in the U.S., urban American Indians are rarely clustered in specific neighborhoods. They are widely dispersed throughout these massive metropolitan areas, which, unfortunately, often makes them an invisible population to city planners and local governments.
Which brings us to Section 2, 4 Pillars of Need, the Urban Challenge.
Because this population is so geographically dispersed, and because they lack a single collective national voice, their unique and severe struggles often just fly completely under the radar of larger institutions. To truly understand how they're living, researchers and organizations like the National Urban Indian Family Coalition have identified 4 core dimensions or pillars of community development that urgently need attention. Those are education, housing, health and wellness, and economic development. We're going to break down the data for each one of these to see exactly what this invisible population is really up against. Looking first at education. Now, what's really staggering about this is that 39% of Native children under the age of 5 live in poverty. That is nearly double the rate for the general U.S. population. And parents living below the poverty line often lack the resources to support early cognitive growth, which leads to a massive school readiness gap. These kids start out behind in the earliest grades, and that disparity only widens over time. Tragically, statistics show less than half of Native students in the public school system actually graduate from high school. Moving to our second pillar, housing. This is a massive hurdle. Look at the denial rate for conventional home purchase loans. It's 36% for American Indians and Alaska Natives. Actually, compare that to just a 15% denial rate for Caucasians. It's more than double. This creates an artificial ceiling on wealth building. Furthermore,
Despite the federal government's legal and trust responsibility to provide adequate housing, nearly every city reports a disproportionate number of natives in shelter care, with a severe lack of transitional housing built specifically for their community.
And for those who do manage to secure housing, the living conditions present a stark contrast. 8.1% of native homes are overcrowded, compared to just 3.1% of homes in the general U.S. population. This overcrowding directly affects a person's ability to maintain a stable environment, which in turn impacts their education and employment. It's all connected, and it clearly reinforces the immediate need for targeted housing programs in our cities.
Our third pillar is health and wellness. These communities face disproportionately high risks of disease across multiple conditions. Just as one glaring example, childhood obesity is twice as common in Native children aged 2 to 5 as it is in non-Hispanic white or Asian children. These underlying health disparities complicate literally every other aspect of urban life, making targeted wellness, nutrition, and physical activity programs absolutely critical for these communities. Finally, our fourth pillar, economic development. Native Americans already grapple with historically high poverty rates. About 1 in 4 live below the poverty line. But economic downturns, they hit this community with devastating force. Look at the Western region, which includes states like California, Oregon, and Washington. Back in 2007, Native unemployment was at 6.4%, but by 2009, it had skyrocketed to 18.7%. Intergenerational poverty creates massive barriers to employment, like securing stable housing or paying for childcare, making sheer survival a daily struggle.
Let's move to Section 3, a model for success, urban innovation.
Now, I know those systemic challenges sound incredibly heavy, but this is a highly resilient population. As former President Barack Obama pointed out, instead of waiting for Washington, many of our cities have already become their own laboratories for change. Because so many resources available on reservations just aren't accessible in cities, local organizations have really stepped up. They're taking matters into their own hands, serving as a bastion of cultural life, and creating truly innovative models to solve these complex problems.
The ultimate case study of this localized innovation is the Native American Youth and Family Center, or NAYA, based in Portland, Oregon. Over the last 40 years, NAYA has grown from a small-scale social service agency into a comprehensive, powerhouse community development organization. They are out there, actively turning the dire statistics we just looked at into actionable, measurable success stories.
So the crucial point here is how they actually do it. With an $8 million operating budget and over 100 full-time staff, NAYA uses a multi-tiered, holistic approach. They don't just tackle one problem. They tackle the whole ecosystem of poverty. They provide youth services, education, domestic violence prevention, elder care, and housing assistance. They even run a commercial-grade kitchen for nutritious meals and focus on economic development through microlending. They've built these strategic partnerships with local governments and other communities of color, proving that when you invest in culturally specific, community-driven centers, you get profound results.
Which brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with today. If 78% of Native Americans live off-reservation, yet our public consciousness and our resources are still largely looking the other way, how do we adapt? How does recognizing this dispersed, invisible urban population change the future of how our cities plan, build, and allocate resources? Bringing visibility to these communities isn't just about correcting some historical misconception, it's about reshaping the future of our urban landscapes so that absolutely everyone who calls them home can thrive. Thank you so much for exploring this with us today on The Explainer.